District A. To give a brief introduction for the two candidates, firstly, Sabrina Bazzo is a candidate running for re-election to the district board. She was elected onto the board in November of 2020 and has recently become a delegate for the California School Board Association. Her challenger is Dr. Trull, an educator at the University of San Diego and UCSD. She is a nonprofit leader who has worked with several nonprofit organizations and has served as the chair for the San Diego Unified District Advisory Council on Compensatory Education for the past 2 years. First, I wanted to give a brief introduction to provide context regarding the district the candidates will be representing, as well as the role that the school board has in functionality within the San Diego school system. District A is the subdistrict of San Diego Unified that encompasses the geographical region of Claremont, Linda Vista, Mira Mesa, and Scripps Ranch. Schools within this subdistrict include Challenger Middle School, Mira Mesa High, and Scripps Ranch High School. Board members are elected to represent the interests of the students within their district, in this case District A, and thus have the responsibility of advocating for the voices of the students and the district's public education. Board members are obligated to involve the community in meaningful ways by setting a direction for the district and communicating clear information about district policies, educational programs, and goals that are to be adopted to achieve their vision. The role of the trustees who sit on locally elected school boards is to ensure that school districts are responsive to the values, beliefs, and priorities of their communities. Boards fulfill this role by performing 5 major responsibilities. These are setting direction, establishing an effective and efficient structure, providing support, ensuring accountability, and providing community leadership as advocates for children, the school district, and public schools. With this in mind, I would like to begin by posing the first question. So for Sabrina first. In the past year, the school district has faced criticism for its lack of transparency, particularly after the abrupt closure of the Empire Burnsville Academy without prior input from parents or teachers. This incident reflects a broader pattern of communication issues within the district, leading to feelings of being blindsided among families and educators. With this context in mind, how do you intend to promote a greater sense of transparency and enhance collaboration between the school district and families?
Yeah, thank you so much, Naomi. I first want to just say thank you all for being here. School board oftentimes doesn't really get the attention that it needs in a race, and as we all know, school board candidates and trustees make very important decisions about their school communities and our larger community as well. And so I'm so glad we have this opportunity to have this discussion. And also, I love that we're having the student voice here as well. We really try to expand that as much as we can at San Diego Unified. So I just wanted to share that as well. With regard to transparency on the school board, I know that there's been criticism, and I agree. There are times that don't always know about things at a timely manner that I think I do. It's an area that we have very much been trying to focus on more. We recently did a survey with our parents and community members to see what's the best way to share information with our community. People take in information different ways: email, text, other social media. So we're trying to work in a variety of ways to make sure that we're reaching our parents. We also have a number of different groups within within San Diego Unified. We have what's called our clusters. That's our within our school district, because we are so large. We are the second largest school district in the state of California. So we are a very large school district. We have the feeder schools for each area. For example, in Claremont, we have the elementary schools that feed into Marston Middle, that feed into Claremont High. So that's called a cluster. We have regular meetings with those groups to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the parents. And during those conversations, we've also put together an agenda at the beginning of the year to really say, what do the parents want to see? What do they want? How do they want their voices heard? So we're trying to focus on getting to our parents. And a lot of those meetings are in Zoom, so it makes it more available to everyone. In fact, we had a recent cluster meeting with the Madison cluster, and we had a huge turnout from the parents, which I think it was like 45 parents that attended that meeting. And we also have, throughout the year, we have workshops. We have what's called our local control accountability plan workshop, and that is really the framework of how we are running the district. We have citizens or any community members, anyone is welcome to attend those meetings. We also have budget workshops that we've started to provide, I believe that's twice a year. And so we're providing more information around that because budget is another issue that's extremely complex and something that our community really should know about and be aware and transparent. It is the taxpayers' monies that we're using to run our schools. So those are some of the ways that we are trying to increase our transparency and be more communicative to our families and our communities.
Sure, just comment about transparency, communication. So again, thank you for having us here. It's great to be here. It's nice to be on the campus that I teach at, Nonprofit Management as a graduate program. So I'm a parent of 3 kids who attend San Diego Unified, and I've been in the district for over a decade now. And communication transparency has been an issue, an ongoing issue for as long as I can remember. So it's something that the district has talked about working on, and some would say that they really haven't made many strides. And we know how to communicate with parents. It's about inviting them and letting them know that things are happening before they happen rather than after they happen. I sit on one of the largest district advisory committees, the District Council for Compensatory Education, and it helps more than 175 school sites with their school site councils. Every school has a school site council, which is in charge of making decisions. It's a shared leadership structure between school administrators and teachers and parents, families. And they make shared decisions about the site's resources, mainly their budget. Some schools are called Title I schools. They have Title I funding, which is federal funding that comes down, and other schools are not. And so as chair of the DAC, we've been trying to engage with the district over the past few years to be a part of this LCAP, the Local Control Accountability Plan, that the state asks us to do as a district. And we really haven't had much success because there are so many parents that want to be involved in their child's education. And they want to offer what they can, but it's been a real barrier, a real struggle with the district. So as a trustee, one of my areas that I'm really going to focus on is transparency. And not only transparency, but it's communication. What does that mean? That means being out in the community, attending the cluster meetings. I am a part of the climate cluster, like Trustee Bazzo mentioned. However, some clusters are more active than others. Some clusters don't even meet. The Madison cluster is mentioned. That was the first time it had met in over 4 years. So the communication aspect is something that we definitely need to work on in the district, but it requires intentionality. It requires being in the communities that you're representing. It requires sharing information. It requires talking about the things that are coming ahead and how people can get involved. And there are lots of different ways that parents want to be involved, and we already know those ways. We have a very strong PTA council of PTAs in our schools. We have access. The district provided resources. They set resources on this new framework, the capacity building framework by Dr. Kara Mack. She's nationally recognized for parent engagement strategies, but that hasn't really gone through the district as a whole. So all that to say, transparency and communication is key. We cannot do our work as educators. We can't do our work as parents. Students can't do their work as students unless that information is freely shared and truly engaged with.
Sabrina, you mentioned multiple ways in which San Diego Unified is already trying to implement ways to increase transparency.
Can you speak up, please?
Yeah, of course. Sabrina, you mentioned multiple ways in which San Diego Unified is already trying to increase transparency, but I was wondering if, given that you are reelected, what would you want to change for the future in transparency?
Gosh, there's so many ways that we need to focus on that. I mean, I guess I'll address the what's been in the media. This has been an issue within the past month that we had to terminate our superintendent. Probably most of you are aware. So with regard to that issue specifically, as soon as we got the information and we realized there was a valid or the potentially valid claim of misconduct, the board acted quickly. We hired an external investigator. That process took a few months because with investigation and legal processes, you need to make sure to give them time to comprehensively really complete their investigation. And we needed to allow that because we wanted to make sure that we had all the information that we had in a comprehensive manner before making a determination. And once we did terminate our superintendent. We brought in our interim superintendent, Dr. Bagula. But during that time, we have had conversation with people about how did this happen? Why, what is happening within the district? And, I can speak to the time I've been on the district, which has been the last 4 years. We have increased our Title IX, that covers sexual misconduct and gender discrimination issues. So we've enhanced our department. We have several more attorneys that are focusing on those issues. I think in the past, part of the gap was that we didn't have the staff to really follow up on some of the claims that have been made in the past. So we are increasing that. One of the other things is we're going to really focus or work closely with at the school site, our areas and superintendents, our district, and make sure that the policies and procedures that we put in place are really being followed out. Because it's one thing to say, you need to do this training and make sure you know what you're doing, but is that really happening? So one of the things that I'm going to make a priority is really all the way down to the school site, that includes the custodian, the front office workers, the teachers in the classroom, all the way up to our superintendent, because we are not going to tolerate any type of misconduct of this type. And so we are making a concerted effort to make sure that all of our staff is not only trained, but also knows where to go, knows what to do in that situation, or that they feel comfortable, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our staff and our students all feel safe on our campuses. So that would be one example of an area where I feel that transparency has in the past not been as good, but we are working to strengthen that.
You mentioned the firing of Superintendent Lamont Jackson. To give the audience more background for that, I want to just explain some background to that. So the firing of Superintendent Lamont Jackson over allegations of sexual misconduct, as well as a federal investigation that highlighted San Diego Unified's failure to address sexual harassment and assault complaints, has resulted in doubts of the district's ability to adequately handle such matters. The U.S. Department of Education's report criticized the district for noncompliance with Title IX regulations and the presence of evident systemic issues that allowed misconduct to remain unaddressed for years. So I guess adding on to what Sabrina said, Crystal, if you would like to answer, what measures do you intend to implement in order to ensure sexual misconduct allegations within the district are handled transparently, and how will you work to reestablish trust with the community and ensure accountability at all levels of district leadership?
Great question. So what measures would I implement to improve accountability? Well, first of all, we have to know what's happening, and that can only happen through regular updates from different departments, particularly a Title IX department. And as a board trustee, it would be our job, my job as a board trustee, to make sure that I know what's happening in the district, especially with things like sexual harassment allegations, any type of lawsuits. So I would want to implement regular reporting structures to make sure that I know what's pending, what's been resolved, what's in the pipeline, because as I'm out in the community, things will come up. I'll hear from parents saying, I tried to reach somebody, nothing happened, and it's up to me to know that that's actually in process. So I would really want to make that a public reporting process too at each board meeting. I want to have a part of the agenda, a piece of the agenda that talks about how many cases do we have as a district. Of course, we can't release confidential information or things that are under investigation, but how many cases do we have, and what are they related to? How many students are involved? How many teachers are involved? How many staff are involved? Because that is a way to establish that trust with the community. When you hide information, people, they get nervous and they wonder what's going on behind the scenes. And I feel like the more information we can share, the better. So I'm really committed to making that information available in the public arena, as well as follow-ups. It can't just be about the board meeting. The board meeting is twice a month. If you've ever been to one of the board meetings, they're very long, and they're a little dry sometimes, as sometimes policy work can be, but there have to be other measures that we communicate to our school sites and our families, and in the what we talked about earlier, communication in person, electronic communication, talking about things ahead of time. So I really want to implement some structures that are publicly available to really tell the community, this is what we're dealing with, this is what we're working on, because again, that we're really helping to trust. It will help me trust the district as a parent. That's is experiencing this day to day.
I'd like to add something. So, Voice of San Diego, our education reporters for years have reported on and done really big investigations on different kinds of sexual abuse coming from teachers to students, This is a big issue. We've written a lot about it. And when the feds came out with that report that the district has not handled these investigations well in the past, for us, it was kind of like, hey, we've been reporting on this. Like, this is a validation that this is an issue here at the district. And, just a few, days, weeks after that, we learned that, there were allegations and investigation regarding actions by the superintendent of the very district that was investigated. Do you see this as a reckoning by the district? And so, how do we move forward? So, whoever wants to take that on first.
Okay. Yes and no. It's a reckoning in that now the public knows what many people in the district have known for years, and many parents and families have known for years. The district is unable or unwilling, we're not sure, to really handle these things. So it's a reckoning now that the public knows. But is it a reckoning that the district will actually do something about it? I'm not sure. I am not convinced. Mainly because there's been no acknowledgement of the people who've been impacted. There's been no accountability taken for what happened to these lives, these 253 lives that the federal government determined were inappropriately investigated. What about them? We talk about we're changing structures, we're changing offices, or we didn't know about things, but we did know. And oftentimes we see teachers and staff and people in the district that are acting inappropriately. If you've been in the district long enough, you know that they're not really addressed. They just move from school site to school site to school site, and these issues are never really resolved. So to answer your question, yes and no.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd also like to add to that my tenure started at San Diego Unified in January 2021. So I also am a parent in the district. Both my daughters, and my oldest daughter here and my youngest daughter, attended schools in Mira Mesa and graduated from Mira Mesa School. So I have been a parent in the district and a very extremely involved parent. I was PTA president at my daughter's elementary school. I started right when she was a kindergartner in PTA. I was PTA president at the middle school, and I was also foundation president at the high school. And during that time, I also developed a lot of those relationships with, just learning more from our teachers, from our principals, from our area superintendents, and really enjoyed that work and enjoyed becoming just part of that community, and also being involved at the Mira Mesa Town Council level as well. And during that time, I got to know a lot about the district, and that's what really prompted me to want to go to that next level and really represent our students at a higher level. Both my parents are public school teachers, so it's really instilled in me that the importance of public education. So with that being said, I think from my perspective, a lot of it is you have to be an involved parent too. You have to want to know what's going on in your schools, and it's not possible, I know, for all parents to be as involved. But during that time, I've had nothing but really, for the most part, pretty positive relationships with a lot of our school districts, a lot of our, San Diego Unified staff. They're extremely hardworking, and they are doing the right thing. I think part of the reason, as my opponent has mentioned, is just sometimes, again, not having an enhanced Title IX department, sometimes maybe not knowing where to go. And sometimes we have gotten claims before, and they haven't always been valid, because anyone can really say, oh, this person did this to me, this person did this to me. And oftentimes our legal counsel looks into that, and I've asked for many of that information, and those claims there's not anything to go by. When we have had proof, when we have had someone in, specifically to make a claim, it gets followed through with, and there have been, like I said, prior to my tenure, I can't speak to, there have been gaps, and some of that is because of our staff. But again, when we have talked about this, a lot of it is because we don't always have specific. When you go through and make a legal claim about something, you have to have proof, you have to have information, you have to have the way to really follow through with the legal counsel. So that's been also a piece of it. But as I mentioned, with our Title IX, we've really made a lot of progress in the last couple of years, specifically bringing on more attorneys, really focusing on this as one of our major priorities, and really making sure, as I mentioned, we're getting all the way down to everyone at all levels. And again, sometimes people might say, oh yeah, well I saw something, but I didn't know what to do, or I heard something, and making sure that that's not the case. We want to make sure that all of our students, all of our staff feel safe, and I'm continue to talk about that both at the cluster meetings, at the school site, and at any community events. And happy to share. And I tell people, if you feel uncomfortable, if you need to talk to someone, give me a call. I give up my cell phone. I'll give up my personal email to anyone that wants to speak. And we want to make sure that our schools are a safe place, and we feel that we're strengthening that relationship, especially within the past few years since with the current school board.
I just wanted to move the conversation to now talk about the issue of funding that is prevalent within the San Diego Unified School District. So the expiration of federal funding has led San Diego Unified facing a massive budget deficit this year. The deficit is projected to increase, likely reaching $176 million next year and $230 million the following year. What would you propose to address the current challenges related to funding and resource allocation within the school district? Do you feel there are areas that need increases in funding? Crystal, you want to take things?
Sure. It's a reality. We don't have enough money coming up in the next few years. Part of that is because of the federal funding. We had one-time COVID money that was used, and the district chose to use it on things that required ongoing support. So a little bit about me. So I have worked more than 20 years in the nonprofit sector. I've led nonprofit organizations. I've managed them. I understand complex budgets. And I will tell you one thing about nonprofits. They do a lot with very little. And that comes from knowing your budget. That comes from understanding how your resources are allocated. I look at resources in 4 ways: physical, financial, human, and intellectual. How are those resources being allocated to fulfill your mission? So as a district, what I want to do as a trustee, I want to make sure that all of our resources have a demonstrated positive impact on student success. There's a lot of money we're spending as a district. I had 2 graduate students of mine last year do a study, and I had them look at a few things. We looked at 18 months of board meetings, San Diego Unified board meetings. We looked at how often the board voted unanimously on decisions. We looked at the consent agenda. The consent agenda is this piece of the agenda that has multiple items that are approved with just 1 vote. And what my students found, that 99% of all votes were unanimous, and the board spent between 30 seconds and 1 minute and 45 seconds discussing this consent agenda, which included anywhere between $30 million and $220 million worth of expenditures. So that tells me, as somebody who does governance for a living, there is not a lot of time being spent discussing how our resources are impacting our students. So right off the bat, the budget, we all have to brace for the fact that these deficits are coming. One of the things that is important for us to do as a district is to engage our parents, our families, our teachers, our staff, our communities in this process, be very transparent about what those dollars look like, where we're spending them. It's very difficult to find budget information in San Diego Unified. It's hidden. You have to really search, and when you find it, you have to figure out, what does this all mean? It's not easy to understand, but we have to all be a part of that decision-making process so we can make collected and shared decisions, because they're going to be mad to anybody. So that's how I would approach funding, and also look at funding in a way that that it not only ties itself to success, but also it gathers the ideas from the community as well, because there's so many great ideas out there that we can implement and use.
Are you saying engaging the community, talking about, and also having maybe more in-depth discussions about where we're sending money to currently? And then how does that address a deficit, right? You're still going to have.
Yes, that's why I said it's coming. The train's left the station. The decisions have been made. We cannot produce money out of nothing. And I also want to talk about engagement a little bit. In my mind, the way I look at engagement, it's not just, I'm giving you information, here's what you need to know. It's really coming back and saying, you know what, this is what you told me, and this is what we did about it. Let's talk about what the next steps are. It's a full circle of engagement. So like I said, the cuts are coming, the train's left the station, but if the more people we get involved in what those cuts are going to look like, and creative ways from the community about how to address those cuts, and so that they're part of that decision, I feel like it won't be easy, but it'll be a little easier to take, because again, when you hide information, it just really erodes that trust that I've seen over time to the district.
So yes, budget is definitely an issue, as my opponent mentioned, particularly coming out of COVID. We have been planning for the diminished ESSER funds, as they're called, or COVID funding. And so we have been planning. That has been something that's been ongoing within the district as far as trying to make sure that we are planning for this time. As I mentioned earlier, we have also offered budget workshops that parents are welcome to attend. We've brought state experts out, because even me, I agree, the budget is very complex. I've been on the Audit and Finance Committee and been very involved in our budget discussions with our finance department on many levels. Making sure that we're doing good by our taxpayers. So during those workshops, are asking questions in addition to having the community there to ask questions, and we welcome that. We want that input from our community. I would also say that we have experts from the State Department that have come out to actually share information that has been very beneficial, not only for the board, but I think for our community. Also at our cluster meetings, our area superintendent, I know for District A, with this last budget crisis, she and our middle school area superintendent put together a presentation just for the parents for District 8 at those meetings, and also shared that with them individually through emails. So it was really trying to provide that information and kind of break it down and really help parents in our community understand. So we've done that as well. We've also done listening sessions through our recent work with the Council of Great City Schools, which is an urban nonprofit urban organization that I've been very active with. We have put together a framework called Student Outcomes Focused Governance. We started that in 2023 when under my leadership as president. I instituted that process, and now we're putting in place our goals. And with that, we're really trying to listen, making sure we have listening sessions with the community. We also have what's called, we're looking at our vision for 2030. And with that, we've gone out to talk to parents, principals, students. We want to make sure we have the student voice in there. What's going to be most important with that, when we're looking at budget cuts? And in that same vein, we are trying, of course, always the emphasis is to try to keep things away from the classroom, right? So our current superintendent, our interim superintendent, has been working previous to even her coming into that position, really in curriculum, because we have a lot of curriculum. We're a huge school district. And we don't always know if something's working, if it's not working. Are we really being data driven? So one of the things that we're also looking into is this program working at this particular school? As my opponent mentioned about the budget, we want to make sure that those programs are effective. And with regard to our board meetings, we don't just have 2 board meetings where we talk. We're talking throughout the month. I have one-on-ones with my superintendent every week. I can call her at any time. With the Brown Act, we can talk to one board member about one issue, so that makes it a little bit challenging sometimes. But we're in constant conversation about, hey, what's coming up at this board meeting? What do we need to work on? What's the focus? And we actually ask 4 questions. Our board services operations office asks ahead of time for us to provide questions. So, because as you mentioned, those board meetings are very long. So we can't sit there and have a 5-hour conversation about this consent agenda. So we're trying to do that, and it's almost more effective when I'm actually doing that. Sometimes one-on-one, 2-on-1 with our chief of staff. So we're having those conversations constantly. It's not just in the board meeting. And through our student outcomes focused governance work, we have determined that's kind of, the board meeting is not really to sit there and have hours of discussion. It's really to make sure that the public knows what we're doing, have some discussion, but keep that limited so that we can make sure that we get on to everything in the agenda and keep people there for 5 hours. But also making sure that we're doing the work during the month and making sure that we have everything in place before we get into that board meeting, so that we are able to make those decisions and are already informed and have the answers that we need when we're there.
Given the budget deficit, evidently the district doesn't have enough funding to be able to equally support every asset, right, in the school system. But this being said, what areas or assets would you prioritize the funding on?
So I go back to our student outcome focused governance. As any of you know that have been part or watched the media lately or been in a school board meeting, a lot of what happens in school board meetings has been more politically focused and not always around our students. So the idea behind student outcomes focused governance is really to focus on our students and how are we making sure that those decisions are specifically addressing them and not everything else that's being yelled about in the room. So with that, we are really, again, focusing on a kind of a data, a way to really look at our SMART goals. And that is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So with that, we have a dashboard, a data dashboard at each of our schools now where we can really look at real-time data and determine, hey, what's going on, and really drill down to the specific schools. And we've also addressed what's called our spotlight students. Those are our students that are homeless students, our Black and brown communities, many of our low-income areas. Those are our spotlight students. Our special education students, oftentimes our LGBTQ students, because those are some of the students that are really sometimes having mental health issues. We have a much higher suicide rate within that community. So we're trying to find who are these students that are really struggling and how do we really get to them through this data, focus on data and our specific goals. Because in the past we have had goals that have been kind of lofty and, oh, this sounds great, but we haven't had really ways to figure out if did we actually attain them. So with this process, we are trying to really put in place specifics for each of our school sites and making sure that we're actually showing performance goals from the side of a data and specific measurable goals. So
I guess opposite of that, what would you cut?
Well, okay. So yeah, I think going back to what we've talked about is as much as we're going to as we can to every level, we want to make sure that we are not touching the school, the actual classroom. And of course, even if you make it cut at the district, you're still going to, in some ways, impact the classroom. But actually, trying to avoid teacher layoffs. When last year we had actually a $76 million budget cut that we needed to make, and we worked closely with labor, and we were able to avoid teacher layoffs, which we're really proud of. We're going to continue to try that, to do that this year as much as we can as well. We're also, as I mentioned, looking at our curriculum resources, seeing what's really working and what's not. Another area that we're really looking at is things like working more with the philanthropic community. One of the areas I feel like we need to do more of is really partner with our nonprofits, with our other educational organizations. We're looking into hiring a grant writer. We have grants that are written within different departments within the district, but we don't really have a grant writer that can look at the whole picture and say, hey, we could really write a big grant that would cover, the majority of our elementary schools or something. So we're looking at writing a grant writer to really write those grants at a much bigger level. And also our superintendent is working with philanthropies to see how we can really partner. I mean, we are doing some of that work, but really how we can partner more in a larger way so that we can maybe offset some of those costs. One example is our summer program, which started during COVID, coming out of COVID, and a lot of that funding was through COVID funding. And what we've done now is we've really found different groups that we can partner with to still provide. Our VAPA, our Visual and Performing Foundation, has brought in a lot of funding from local organizations. We have a lot of programs around health and fitness, so we're working with like the Parks Foundation and all different kinds of groups to really maintain those programs. And again, we're really trying to focus on our hardest to reach students because they're the ones that have the least resources and the ones that we want to try to lift up. And as we're doing that, it's really going to benefit the entire district.
Crystal, if you could answer that question, what would you prioritize funding on and what is not a priority?
I wanted to go back a little bit to the budget workshops that Trustee Bazzo mentioned. The budget workshops, there's two of them a year for a $1.6 billion budget. There's two opportunities for the public to come and speak 1 to 3 minutes regarding their thoughts about the budget. So I don't think that is really the kind of engagement that the board might think it is. I know for me it isn't. So the priorities for me, I would want to ask the people that are going to be affected. I would want to ask the students, the teachers, the staff, where should we cut? I think oftentimes these decisions are made internally in silos. And while I think the district's thought is that they're making them in the best way that they can, they're missing a lot of information. These listening sessions went out to the community. And the last I saw, there were only responses from maybe 1,800 students and family members of a district of 95,000 students. I just don't feel that that is as comprehensive as it needs to be in order to make fully informed decisions. So where I would make cuts, I would want to ask the people that are going to be impacted and get data from them, because each school site is so different. We cannot make across the board decisions because 175 school sites, what one community needs is much different than another community needs. And I do want to help these spotlight students, but I also don't want to forget those students who are high performing as well, who want to be able to move ahead and grow. We have to be able to address the needs of all students, and that's the challenge with this district because it's so big. It's so many different needs, but it's not impossible. I go back to, we have to get the community involved with what we're doing because we need to hear from them. They're the experts. They're on the ground doing the work, and that informs the decisions that are made, that should be made in a transparent, open manner, not behind closed doors where we find out after the fact.
Moving on, I'd like to talk about the topic of mental health within the school district. So with the increasing prevalence of mental health issues among students, what steps would you take to ensure that mental health services within schools are both accessible and effective? Sabrina, you'd like to answer this question first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it kind of goes back to some of the conversations we've had around our spotlight students. Oftentimes, especially if you're a parent or, have a child in your life, that if they're not doing well emotionally, that they're not going to do well in any areas of their life, right? So mental health just covers so much, but we can't even talk about, the achievement gap and other areas that we're discussing without mental health. And as a public health educator, I've had about 30 years as an educator in the San Diego community. So one of the things that I think is most important is to really make sure we're addressing that again. And yes, we want to absolutely address all of our students, and that is extremely important. But a lot of times our teachers are talking about burnout. That is really a lot of times highlighted by, they might have one or two specific students in their classroom that are just really struggling, or behavioral issues or whatever else it might be. And if we can get to that student and really focus on them, it's going to make that teacher that much more be able to perform and help all of our students that much more. Even our top performing students. I mean, they also suffer because they're really trying hard to get into great four-year colleges. There's a lot of pressure on them as well. So this is really a problem across the district. That's why in as I mentioned, our student outcomes focused governance framework that we put together with the Council of Great City Schools, one of our goals is actually specifically around mental health. And we're really on the cutting edge when it comes to that, so it's really kind of exciting. Again, we're working with urban school districts from across the country to really look at this data, because there's a lot of interest in it. And one of the big things is how to measure that. So we're looking for a good measuring tool right now so that we can really, again, as we talked about, have a little bit more data, make it more specific so that we are assessing where our students are at. And also not only our students, we can't just stop there. We need to work with our parents. We have a lot of community school grants that we're working on with the state. And with those, we actually have a community person at that particular school, a community associate or director. And their main job is to work with the parents, work with community leaders, and say, how can we better help your student in this community? Even things like our lack of food or housing insecurity. I know at Hoover High School, we have an actual food pantry that is available for our entire community. We have medical clinics in our schools, so we're addressing a lot of the mental health issues there, or trying to address not only from a mental health standpoint, but also physical standpoint. A lot of our students don't have health care, so having those clinics on site is incredibly important. So we are looking at a lot of issues. In fact, yesterday we were just at the Claremont cluster meeting. I was there with Dr. Trull, and we had a talk from the county all around mental issues. And one of the things that we're doing actually in our classrooms is at a younger age. I mean, I started doing breathing exercise and relaxation, I think when I was in my 20s. Now we're teaching our students really in the classroom at a young age, like elementary school level. And I think that's so important because it also helps them to self-regulate. You know, if you're having a bad day, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're young or old, you can still use those exercises. And also having our parents come in, we have at the different schools that we're working with, specifically with our community school initiative, but also, as Dr. Trull mentioned, with our Scholastic, we have a Scholastic books you're probably familiar with. They also have a Scholastic side of the organization that's really working with parent engagement and family engagement. And a lot of that, again, is getting at what's going on with that student and how can we best address that. One thing that we did at Mira Mesa High School is, as we're coming out of COVID, you know, with the chronic absenteeism, which is another part of mental health, one of the football coaches actually started going out to some of the students' homes with the parents there, of course, but saying, why is this person not coming to school? Like what? And a lot of times it was like, we can't get him out of bed. Like he won't get up. And, you know, they might be working 2 or 3 jobs, and a lot of them, you know, are immigrant parents. They're just trying to get by, and there might be language and language barriers and culture barriers. Just that alone, that interaction and that connection really helped, and we made an increased difference in terms of getting their students back to school, getting them engaged in schools, another very important thing. Another thing that we've seen is just making school more joyful. Like a lot of kids feel like, oh, no, I don't feel, but you know, just making it a place where it's fun to be, not like, you know, a disciplinarian thing that, oh, you're not at school, and, you know, trying to make it more incentivized. I know some of our principals have done, you know, especially at the elementary school level, oh, if we get to a certain level of attendance, and, you know, we'll have a pizza party. At the high school level, they might be doing something different, but making it more of a place. I know our interim superintendent is very, there's a big thing for her, is just having more joy in the classroom and wanting our kids to be there. I mean, because it should be fun for them. They spend a lot of time there.
Could you repeat the question one more time?
Yes, of course. So with the increasing prevalence of mental health issues among students, what steps would you take to ensure that mental health services within schools are both accessible and effective?
Okay. So mental health. I think for San Diego Unified, I've seen in my own 3 kids and their friends, you know, that after COVID, it's been hard. It's been hard for these students. There's a lot of things that they've been struggling through. The learning loss, lack of the social interaction has impacted, especially the younger kids that were at school during COVID. And for me, I go back to the culture of the district. The culture of the district really matters for a student and their mental health. As a trustee, I would want to make sure the steps that I would take to make sure that those classrooms are welcoming, to make sure the teachers have a mindset of my student can accomplish an infinite amount of things. I want to make sure that our teachers have the supports that they need, which means additional academic support, the pullouts, to help some of those spotlight students, because you know they're facing, the teachers have anywhere between 32 to 37 students in a classroom, less for the younger grades. That teacher's mindset impacts all that student experiences in that classroom. And we have some amazing teachers, amazing staff that really want to be there, but there are some teachers that are not creating conducive learning environments. So as a trustee, we're going to make sure that we're addressing those things. Counselors, we learned from COVID that counselors are super important, that they're really beneficial to have. Not the counselor who helps you determine your course selection, but counselors who help you identify the needs that you have in your mental or social emotional health, and they support you in that process. And then, you know, I think that goes back to the funding. We have to think of creative ways where we can support those counselors, and it goes back to nonprofit organizations, partnering with them and their expertise to help us cut some of our costs to really provide those services for our students. So I think at the end of the day, no matter what technical solutions we have for mental health and social emotional wellness, no matter how many counselors we have, no matter how many programs we have, no matter how much we're measuring, if the culture of the district isn't one that sets the bar high for our kids and actually does what they need to help them learn and has a mindset, a growth mindset, these kids are going to struggle. So I really have a heart for that, because the teachers make all the difference. As an educator, you know, myself, being in the classroom, it's how you treat your students makes a difference. It makes them want to come back or not. So we really need to make sure that that classroom environment is supported in a way that helps those kids want to be there.
Crystal, you mentioned the mindset of teachers within the classroom, but we also see that teachers are expressing the lack of support within the school system. So my question to you is, what are your plans for improving the teacher's attention and support within the school district? And what would you propose to overcome issues regarding workload and professional development?
Oh, that's a great question. So teacher retention. We need quality teachers. We have a lot of teachers that are retiring who've been with the district for a while. So we need to really attract and retain teachers that are qualified. So, we do have some issues with our tenure and our seniority, the way the contracts are set up. If you're a new teacher, you don't always get your pick of school. The longer you've been in your job, you get your pick of school. And sometimes, some school sites are easier than others depending on your personality. So I would want to open up those possibilities for teachers so that they're not relegated to a certain school site because of how many years they've been teaching. I also want to make sure that the teachers have those, like I mentioned, the pullouts. Oftentimes in a large classroom, you have a variety of students who have different learning needs. So being able to provide what we call pullouts, where there's small group work happening with students who need a specific amount of work, while the teacher can work with other students. So those are very effective. So I want to make sure that they have those kinds of things. And also, what new teachers bring is a renewed energy. They bring ideas. They bring, wanting to make a classroom a fun place that students want to be. So I want to make sure that our teachers who have been there, for a while, that they are supported as well, and that we understand where they're at, what their needs are, and how we can re-energize them to really want to be the best for their students. So it's a long-term process. There's no overnight solution. We do have a teacher shortage, trying to get teachers to fill the roles, as well as counselors and other staff shortages in the district. But I think we really need to change our image too as a district, with all these scandals in the headlines and all these things that are happening inside the district. I wouldn't be surprised if a potential teacher out there is kind of questioning, do I want to work for San Diego Unified or not, with all that's happening. So there's a lot of work that we need to do to address some of the things that are happening with our culture, as I mentioned before.
What do you mean exactly by opening up the possibility for teachers? Because it's a topic I think that can be controversial for some, that newer teachers get put in schools that maybe would probably benefit from having an experienced teacher, right? Because there's schools that tend to be in lower areas that have children that have struggles outside of the classroom. What do you mean by opening up the opportunity?
So to me, that means reformatting the contracts. So that, everybody who knows, we deal with bargaining units in the district. Every type of employee has a bargaining unit that represents them, or they're called unions sometimes. Teachers have bargaining units, administrators have bargaining units, classified staff have bargaining units. So I think it's up to us as a district to make sure that those contracts are arranged in such a way that it actually meets our needs as a district and what we're set out to do, why we exist in the first place, to educate students. So I think that there's room for change in those contracts, what they look like, the tenure, the seniority. As an academic and higher institution, I am confronted with tenure all the time with other faculty. And there is a benefit to having that wealth and depth of experience. But on the flip side, sometimes it creates, opportunities for teachers to kind of get stuck in their ways. So I would want to look at those contracts and make sure that we're creating teacher arrangements so that we can allow those teachers who have a depth of experience, incentivizing them to bring those to school sites that maybe aren't as desirable as others might be, and to really talk about what is this doing to our district, this kind of archaic method of teacher employment.
Sabrina, if you would answer that question.
Yes.
What are your plans for improving teacher retention and support within the school district? And what would you propose to overcome issues regarding workload?
Sure, yeah, no, that is a great question. And I'd like to address the issue about relegating teachers to certain schools, as was mentioned by my opponent. One of the problems, as I've been in the district now and had a lot of experience within the last 4 years, talking to people throughout our community and talking to my fellow board members and parents from other areas. So just to clarify, District A is Scripps Ranch, Mira Mesa, Claremont, and Kearney Mesa. So we have a fair, we have a really balanced, we have a pretty high Title I, which is our low-income students, areas, more in the Kearney Mesa, Claremont, somewhat Mira Mesa areas, and then, we have Scripps Ranch as well. And as mentioned, we want to make sure that we're, we want all of our schools and many of our schools in this district are very strong neighborhood schools. That being said, when a new teacher comes into the district, there are many schools in our district that don't always, the teachers basically don't want to go to some of those neighborhoods, if I'm just being completely honest. So we don't think it's equitable and fair to say, oh yeah, you can just go to, a school in Scripps Ranch or La Jolla. We have to cover all of our schools, and we do need to make sure, and eventually as teachers do get tenure, they can choose where they want to go. But we want to make sure, you can talk to my colleagues that work in south of the 8 schools. A lot of times we do have teachers that don't stay there long. And so it's difficult, and that's part of the problem with the achievement gap, is that we're not getting teachers to stay in some of those positions for long. But some of them, they do go there and they want to stay, in the Lincoln cluster, the Morris cluster. We're having some success, but it's difficult when our teachers are, leaving those areas. So all of our students are important to us, and we want to make sure all of them have the skilled teachers in their classrooms. So that is why we try to make sure that we have teachers across the district, or in all areas of the district. I'd also like to talk about the, just another thing that we do. We're really trying to have more professional development for our teachers, which is just really fresh and new. I think that when I go to some of the PD, the professional development workshops, things like AI or technology or things like that, where they can really, find things that are fun to work with their students, but maybe fun for them. Keep them kind of things in the classroom fresh for them as well. I think that's also important, and we've been doing a lot of work around that. Another area, when we talk a little bit more about the achievement gap, is something called multi-tiered support, student support. And that is making sure, let's say, we have a classroom and, seeing how students are doing, which students are struggling. So we might have them at a second tier, which includes more services that are available. So that lessens both of the burden for that teacher and allows us to have the specific services for those students. We have maybe even a third tier. So all of those to kind of help our students that are really struggling, and also help the teachers so they can focus on all the remaining students in their classroom. Our interim superintendent recently did a survey of our staff, and one of the things that oftentimes they feel like they're not heard or listened to, that's come up, and also not thanked. Sometimes it doesn't even need to be, we're paying you more. It's, do you recognize what I'm doing? I've done this program. So she started a new program in across the district, where you can send little letters of support, just saying thank you for doing this amazing job with the multicultural fair, or and things like that, to just allow some recognition for our students. I know at Alcott Elementary in Claremont, they have a program where it's called Filling Our Buckets, and the students do this too, where and the teachers, and you can actually put a little note in there and say, I appreciate that you did, smiled and said hello to me this morning. So things like that, they're really little things, but to a lot of people, if they're having a bad day, or that, these things matter a lot. So we're trying to, not only make sure our teachers, by the way, are some of the most well compensated in the county, and we have really high standards for our teachers. I mean, I often have people that are trying to interview that can't get jobs in San Diego Unified. So our teacher, the number of spots that are available is pretty low right now. We have most of our spots, with the exception, I will say, of special education. That's always an area where we struggle to get enough teachers. But the teachers that we have are, for the most part, very proud to be part of San Diego Unified. They are, they do have it's a very competitive salary when you compare it with the 42 other school districts. There's 42 school districts, by the way, in San Diego. But we are trying to find other ways to make sure that our teachers at high standards are also being recognized in other ways. Also leadership at the school site. There's a lot of opportunities for our teachers to be involved as leaders and maybe mentors, maybe with a new teacher helping them. And that gives them a sense of importance and a way to show leadership in the district as well.
Okay, now moving on to audience questions. First, how will you improve Madison and Claremont cluster high schools to increase the attendance of neighborhood students versus those students choicing into UC and Mission Bay Highs? Crystal, if you would answer first.
One of my children attends Claremont High School, and I think, one of the issues that we have at the district, again, is the transparency and communication. I was the co-chair of that cluster for 2 or 3 years, and it was very challenging to get parents there because when the parents would come, their questions were never answered. The issues that they brought were never addressed. And so they just felt like, why am I even going? It's a waste of my time. So I think, again, it goes back to that transparency piece and communication piece of, what you're saying, we're actually going to do something with, and to make sure that the parents know that. Madison Cluster, as a trustee, that stopped meeting, I think about 3 or 4 years ago. So as a trustee, I would have wanted to engage that cluster much sooner than the last 2 weeks when I met for the first time. So, as a trustee, we have a position of power and of influence in the community to rally people and to really engage and to make our presence known in the community. Because I think that signals to families, we really do care. So, in order to re-engage those clusters, as a trustee, I gotta be at those meetings, I gotta be at those school sites, I gotta be talking to those parents and families and understanding, what it is that they want to talk about and actually do something about the issues that they present. Because we mentioned the board meeting. If a family or a parent has to go to a board meeting to have their voice heard, the system has broken somewhere along the way. It's broken down. Because for a family to have to spend that time and not get their issues addressed at the school site or at the cluster level, there's a real issue there. So I would want to just be present and be involved, get everybody there, try and work with them as much as possible, and really do something about the issues that they present. And I'm going to say actually, about the cluster. Trustee Bazzo mentioned that the topics were decided for clusters. Those were decided by administrators. They were not decided by parents. And these clusters are meant to be for the parents. So again, as co-chair of the Claremont cluster, there was no engagement from our families about what topics they wanted to discuss.
Sabrina?
Yeah. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I've made some notes, but then we lost. Sorry.
The question is, how will you improve Madison and Claremont cluster high schools to increase the attendance of neighborhood students versus those students choosing in the UC and the Federal schools?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to start with the cluster meetings. And the thing about cluster meetings is we do have a lot of parents there. We have multiple schools, but each cluster could be its own school district. A lot of school districts in California are the size of one of our clusters. So there are a variety of issues that come up in our cluster meetings. We can't really address all of them within, it's usually like an hour to an hour and a half cluster meeting. So we do try to prioritize, or the clusters try to really prioritize what's, really the one that's coming to the top. I would say, I would have to disagree about its agenda. I was also a parent involved with the cluster, and this was the Mira Mesa cluster, but I've also heard from parents in Claremont that they have been able, and maybe that's just recently, but there has been quite a lot of opportunity to provide input to those agendas. Both, I've seen that as a parent and I've seen that now as a school board meeting. But again, if it's an issue where it's a specific school site and it might be an issue that's just specific to that particular school, sometimes because that's not really appropriate to talk about that at an entire cluster meeting for everyone. We try to make sure the first kind of person that really needs to be addressed to is our principal, right? So we try to give them the opportunity to address the issue. If there's additional concerns and they don't really feel like those issues are being addressed, then it'll come to the area superintendent and myself, and we'll try to work with that principal. We at Hickman Elementary recently, they had some concerns and worked with their principal. Things didn't feel like they were getting through. We had a meeting of the entire their PTA I think it's a PTO. But anyway, that we had the counselor, head of counseling there. So we had a number of people. I think we even had our legal person there because they had some questions about legal. So we had a whole sit down with all the parents. We're doing that at other schools as those things come up. But sometimes those are issues they're better focused on at the school site rather than at a cluster meeting. Cluster meetings are where we talk more about specific issues that are maybe going on across the district. Some of the things that we're talking about here. Specific to the Madison cluster, I've been asking since I was on the board, why do we not have Madison? We did have, I want to say like one when I was just coming on, and I agree, they needed to be Madison cluster meetings. And to be honest, the area superintendent at that time, it was kind of her and some of the others that decided not to. But we have a new area superintendent in Madison who's done an incredible job. Her name is Maria Gomez. She was a former principal at Erickson Elementary. And she's the one, along with the principals at Madison, have really brought that together. I'm really proud of that cluster, that they are now meeting, starting to meet as a cluster. I'd also like to say that, again, just yesterday, when we were in the Claremont meeting, there's some new construction going on in Claremont. If you're from that area, I think we have a Claremont. So it's going to be in an area where we're going to have more students going to Well, there'll be increased population of students that will be able to go to Madison High School, because I do think it's unfair that UC. So what happens is UC, University, and Mission Bay, a lot of our parents decide to choice their kids in from Claremont to those two areas, which I'm like, why are we letting that happen? I guess, so I was a parent from Mira Mason. For a while, that was happening a lot. A lot of parents were tracing their kids in the Scripps Ranch. And what happened is we just stopped it. Basically, they came to an agreement, with the parents and the principals and the board member, that there was going to be a line. It's like Black Mountain Road, and if you are on one side, you're Mira Mason. If you're on the other side, you're Scripps Ranch. I don't know why we can't do that more in Claremont. I think we want to give parents choice, but there's a lot of parents leaving from that area, and I think we have amazing schools in Claremont. So I think we need to talk more about possibly limiting how many kids are going to Mission Bay and UC. And we have had increased the Claremont principal just came to our meeting recently, at our board meeting, and talked about, we have 77 new students at Claremont as of this year. So we've been really happy about that, and we want to continue that. But I think we need to have some conversation possibly around the choice process and why so many of our students are, being allowed to go outside of their area when they have amazing schools at Claremont. So.
The final question that we would like to address is, again, from another audience member, but they ask that, can you both comment on the grading system change? I believe this is in regards to the standard-based grading that was implemented a couple years ago. And so the audience member asks, all parents and kids at their kids' school hate the system, and mentions that their high-achieving student struggles to stay motivated while other kids can get a 50% credit from nothing, not turning in any work. And then the low achieving student knows that they can get away with less work. So the question is, can you comment on this grading system, and what are your thoughts on standards-based grading?
Oh, I think did I go first last time? No. Oh, you went first? Okay, thank you. So I think that, yes, we're talking about standards-based grading here, and if you're not familiar, it's a new grading process that the district has put in place. Again, this is something that's happening across the country and many of our urban school districts. And the reason for standards-based grading is to make it more equitable for all of our students. Oftentimes you'll find in our AP classes and our advanced classes across the district, they're pretty much white kids in there, Asian and white kids. A lot of our Black and brown communities, our students are not represented in these classes, and it's not because they're not as smart, it's because a lot of times they don't have as much of the support and the resources. So standards-based grading is something that's more around being more equitable, and basically what it means is, if I take a test and you take a test, and maybe you get an A and I get a C, there's opportunities for me to take that test again, because it's not, we don't feel that there should be a time limit on knowledge. If you don't understand all of that information, right off the bat, we're giving our students opportunity to have a second chance and try to, bring up that knowledge level, because we know, particularly for math, but also for literacy, that we need to make sure that our students have that foundation to build on. And yes, we do have, if you look at our test scores, although they have gone up, they're not great. And we need to work on those, and we have a lot of work to do on those. And one of those, again, is going back to our spotlight students struggling. So we're trying to find ways not to say that they are getting off the hook, or that any of our students are getting off the hook, but we want to provide opportunity for our students to learn. So it's not just about a grade. It's also about making sure that they understand the information. And for some students, that might take a little bit longer than others. And there is the criticism that, that's going to impact their college, their transcripts and things like that. When I've talked to schools, particularly our high-performing schools like Scripps Ranch High School, the principal, they have, record-breaking, every year they have more and more students that are going to high-level colleges. We have one of the highest graduation rates that we've ever had. So yes, standards-based grading is an adjustment, and it's not, in some cases it's not being done right. So we're trying to make sure that it's consistent across the board and done in the way it's supposed to be done. But a lot of it is just to really focus on some of our basic goals, which is to make sure all of our students are having the opportunity to get the best education they can, and to provide that equitable, opportunity for them. And so that's kind of, in a very summary of the program that we're working on.
Sabrina, you mentioned that standards-based grading was made to make the grading system more equitable.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what the audience member is asking is if standards-based grading is making it easier for a low achieving student to get like a passing grade, while making it more difficult for a high achieving student to get a higher grade. Do you believe that is equitable?
No, and I don't think that's the idea behind standards-based grading. I think the idea behind as I mentioned, is if that's the case, and that's not what the district is trying to attain. What they're trying to attain, again, is to try to make sure all of our students have that opportunity to, if they don't understand a concept, if they don't understand an area of learning, that they have an opportunity to try for that again. And that our students that are high performing are still continuing to get the education as well. They're still going to be getting the same, as I mentioned, high performing standards. And we have shown that because, as I've said, our students are continuing to, we have our graduation rates at the highest rate they've been. Our students are continuing to get into competitive colleges because that is a concern of some parents, that it's going to impact their getting into good colleges. But we want to bring up all of our students, so all of our students have that opportunity, not just students that have the resources and might have more of a fluent background at home and have those resources.
Crystal, did you comment on standards-based?
Sure. So my kids, as I mentioned, they go to Setting Unified Schools, and we were in the throes of this standards-based grading. It was called mastery-based grading, and then they changed it to standards-based grading back in 2021. And this is a prime example of a board trustee, what the job of a board trustee is. The board decided on this policy, this new grading policy for the district. They didn't consult with teachers. They didn't have an implementation plan. There was no way to really roll this out. Schools were confused. I had 2 middle schoolers at the time. They each have 6 teachers. 2 teachers were doing it, the others were not. The students were confused, the teachers were confused, the families were confused. And ultimately, it was up to the teacher to be able to do this grading policy because that's in their contract. They decide how to grade. So the district mandated this standards-based grading without really doing its due diligence. And while the idea behind it is very noble, the idea is that you grade a child based on things that are academic rather than non-academic factors, because kids were getting extra points for bringing in lots of tissues or bringing in wipes. They were getting extra points added to their grade, and that had nothing to do with how they actually understand the subject. So while the idea is very noble, the way it was rolled out was not helpful. And so I teach at the university level, and there are concerns about this grading process. There is no similar process in many higher institutions of learning where you can retake over and over and over again to demonstrate mastery. Some teachers might, but most do not, especially in undergrad, especially in those, core subjects those, that are not part of your major. So I think the idea is good, but it wasn't implemented well, and it forces kids who are very high achievers to just not do their best. Because my own children were telling me stories about their fellow students who were, just doing barely enough work, getting the same grade as them when they would do their homework and score very well on their assessments. So there are a lot of inconsistencies with it. We need to work on things. And again, as a board, we need to be thinking about what these decisions are, how they're impacting our students, making sure that we have the whole community involved in these decisions, rather than making these decisions based on what we think we know behind closed doors.
Thank you. And that concludes the debate. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you.